All right, guys, this is Objective 1A. Objective 1A covers knowing the difference between biotic and abiotic. And so biotic is living and abiotic is non-living. The prefix A is not, bio means life. So there are 8 characteristics that something must have in order to be classified as biotic. And the first and most important is that it must be made of one or more cells. The other 7 are you must have a universal genetic code, must be able to evolve, doesn't mean you're going to evolve, must have the ability to evolve. And evolution is a change in the genetic code, okay? So this is a change to the genetic code. And that's important because a lot of students confuse this change with growth and development, but it's not a growth and development, it's a change to the genetic code. Must be able to respond to changes in the environment, have the ability to maintain homeostasis, and maintaining homeostasis simply means you're going to have a stable internal environment. So you must have a stable internal environment. So it's going to be able to maintain homeostasis, obtain and use energy, and this is done mainly through respiration. So being able to consume or create nutrients and then performing respiration. Reproduce, but that reproduction must be independently, and that you'll see why that's important later on. And grow and develop. So those are the 8 criteria that have been set in place by biologists to classify something as biotic. And if you don't have all 8, if you don't have all 8, you are not classified as living, you're classified as abiotic. Now, as I said before, the first and most important one is that you must be made of one or more cells. And so that brings us to the second part of 1A, which is the cell theory. Now with the cell theory, it's going to answer 3 questions. The first question is, what are cells? Since the most important thing to be classified as living is to be made of one or more cells, then what are cells? What are the things that are made of cells, and where do cells come from? We owe our knowledge about the cell theory to the work of several scientists, but we're going to talk specifically about these 4. First one is going to be Robert Hooke, who coined the term cell through his observations of cork and a microscope, a primitive microscope. And so what we know about cells is they are considered the basic unit of structure and function for all living things, so the basic unit of life. Now, atoms are the base and building block of all matter. So everything is made up of atoms. Atoms are going to be formed from your elements like carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, those things. You're going to have atoms of carbon, atoms of hydrogen, atoms of oxygen. Everything, living and non-living, is made up of atoms. But when we get to that living part, that's when we have the cell. The basic unit of structure and function for all living things is a cell, which means a cell is the smallest thing that can do all 8 of these. And we owe the knowledge of that to Robert Hooke. Now, years later, other scientists began to do experiments as well, and Matthias Schleiden and Theodor Schwann gave us the answer to the second question, which is what is made of cells, and we know that all living things are made up of one or more cells. Schleiden specifically was looking at plants, and Schwann, which sounds like swan, was looking at animals. So their combined work gave us the second tenet to the cell theory, that all living things are made up of cells. That final tenet to the cell theory answers the questions of where do cells come from, and we owe that to the work of Rudolf Virchow, who was studying cancer cells. He was trying to figure out where they originate from, and he discovered that those cancerous cells came from normal cells that had transformed. And so he drew the conclusion that all cells come from pre-existing cells. Now, even though it answers the questions of where do cells come from, the cell theory does not address where the first cell came from. That would be chemical evolution, which we talk about later on. But from ever since the existence of the first cell, all cells have come from other cells. So the tenets of the cell theory: 1 is that the cell is the basic unit of structure and function for all living things. 2, all living things are made of cells. And 3, that cells come from pre-existing cells. Now, that covers most of 1A, but the last part, 1A3, actually addresses viruses. We all know about viruses, especially since COVID. And we know about the flu virus. And we know about, what other virus? So many. Anyway, I digress. But viruses are considered abiotic. Now, let's talk about why viruses are considered abiotic or non-living. We need to go back to 1A1, which are our characteristics of life. First and foremost, viruses are not made of cells. Viruses are genetic information, either DNA or RNA, covered in a protein coat. Some of them do have a viral envelope, but they are not made of cells. So they do not fit the criteria here. Viruses, not made of cells. Now, they do have the genetic code. Remember, you have DNA viruses and you have RNA viruses, so they do have this. And viruses do evolve. We saw that especially with COVID. There were so many different forms of COVID, still evolving today. Viruses is kind of, do they respond to changes in the environment? And so we're gonna leave them alone, question mark there. Some people will say yes, some will say no. But they cannot maintain homeostasis. In order to maintain homeostasis, you must have cell organelles that are able to perform jobs to keep the inside of something stable. And viruses do not contain organelles. Remember I told you, there's genetic information in protein. They don't have organelles, so they can't maintain a stable internal environment. They also don't have a reason to obtain and use energy. So again, they do not have another characteristic of life. Viruses have the ability to reproduce, but not independently. The only way a virus can reproduce is if it takes over a host cell. So it needs a host to reproduce. So in addition to not being made of cells, it can't even make more copies of the virus on its own. It must have a host to reproduce. So can it reproduce? Yes, but can it do it independently? No. And the last thing is viruses do not grow or develop. You need enzymes and organelles in order to do that. Can't do that. So viruses do not meet all 8 criteria, therefore they are considered abiotic. Deuces.